Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Captain's Table. I'm your host, Captain B-Nard, and the topic of discussion today is going to be a power rankings for all live-action Spider-Man movies. And here to discuss that with me, of course, is my not-so-expert panel of movie critics. So for the 10th time now, we have Jonny Reps,
Hello.
and for the 11th time, we have Mitchelonius.
I'm Batman.
I think he said he was Batman, but that's a topic for another day. Anywho, so welcome back, guys, and we're going to be talking Spider-Man today, just because a long-running question has kind of been a compare and contrast between all of the different Spider-Mans that have been portrayed in recent memory, because unlike a lot of other heroes, specifically in Marvel, Spider-Man has undergone a lot of reboots, a lot of recasts, that kind of stuff, and over a relatively short period of time, we've seen three actors play the role of Spider-Man. Those, of course, being Tobey Maguire, who was there for Spider-Man's 1 through 3 in the early to mid 2000s. Then we had Andrew Garfield there in the early 2010s for the two Amazing Spider-Man movies. And then we have Tom Holland now in the mid to late 2010s for the two standalone movies, Homecoming and Far From Home, in addition to the Avengers movies, but those aren't his movies, so we're not going to be talking about those. So, those are the seven standalone Spider Man movies. We're going to be ranking them worst to first, like always, and we're also going to be kind of talking about what we liked or didn't like about the actual roles that the actors played and how they played Peter Parker slash Spider-Man, because that's kind of been like the the a big I don't want to say controversy, but like kind of sort of controversy about Spider-Man is who did it better and which rendition is better and all that good stuff. So that is the game plan. That is what we are going to do. Anyone have anything they would like to add to that?
Yeah, the
Yes,
best three movies are.
to start off the bottom of the list, we're choosing Spider-Man 3.
No, that's not
Well,
the
this
channel average.
unfortunately, Mitch, this is an average, and it is a democracy. And Mitch, even if it wasn't a democracy, Mitch would not be the dictator because it's not his channel.
Well, that is true. So, having all of that said, we're going to get started. So, the official last place for the channel.
Don't make me print a retraction.
Oh God,
You
you
heard what
haven't been
J.
in a
Jonah
retraction in
Jameson
20
said.
years. I know, 20
Yeah,
years.
don't make
Damn
me
it.
do it. We just
Um,
gotta
Get
go with it from
pictures.
here on out.
Sorry, it's too late for that. So, coming in at number 7 on the list, we have The Amazing Spider Man 2. This came out in 2014. This was the second Andrew Garfield Spider Man movie. And I'm going to take the lead on this one because, while I will say I don't hate this movie and I don't think it was a bad movie per se, I will also say that I didn't particularly like this movie either, and I didn't think it was a good movie per se. And there's a lot of reasons for that. So while the movie did have, some good fight scenes and action and all that stuff, and relatively, kind of half and half story, I'll say. So I guess that could be both good and bad because they kind of they were trying to touch on some interesting plot points, but it felt like they didn't quite get there. How they were kind of trying to delve into like Peter Parker's like parents and his dad specifically, and how their death was apparently some kind of like government conspiracy or cover up or some shit like that, which was kind of intriguing, but like they never really got anywhere with it. And to me, like one of the big problems I have with this movie is that the whole movie just feels like it was kind of like a setup for the future, and it didn't really feel like it was paying enough mind to what it was doing at the time, which I think is a big problem for a movie if like all you're doing is trying to aim for the future and you're not trying to build up what you're doing in the here and now as well, then that's an issue in my opinion. Another big issue I have with this one is the character designs for pretty much all the villains, honestly, in this movie, but a lot of the characters as well. Thought were just absolutely terrible. Definitely topping off that list is going to be the Green Goblin rendition that we got in this movie, which was absolutely atrocious. Um,
I don't know. The worst one for me was Venom.
Wrong movie, but we're gonna get to that in a second. Don't worry, Mitch.
I feel like you're on the wrong movie, sir.
No, for
Are
God's
you
sake!
kidding me? Like, even
Why are
though
you
Eric
why are you
Foreman,
being Johnny to me this time, Mitch? Like, what
hold
the
on,
hell is
Eric
going
Foreman,
on here? You guys switch
Eric
roles or
Foreman
something?
was a terrible. Eric Foreman was a terrible choice for Venom. But like, I'm looking at these Green Goblin designs, and like, come on, like the actual Venom suit on Spider-Man 3 was nowhere near as bad as this.
Yeah, the Green
Well,
Goblin
plus
and the
the fact that like
Spider-Man 2.
they made him kind of like they actually almost made him look like a goblin without it.
That was
as
the
well.
problem. Is
With
they
the-
tried like he like drank some acid or sniffed some gas or something, and then
Well,
like
no,
looked like
he
He
drank.
basically he wasn't
didn't
a
drink
goblin. He was a
anything.
meth. He was a meth head. That's what he was.
But you guys don't understand. Like he thought he had the cure for whatever ailed him and what killed his father. And
I
from
don't
what
care
I
if
can
the
understand,
story technically
from
makes
what I
sense.
can understand,
the fucking look was awful.
but listen, from what I can understand, it was like some degenerative disease that like makes you look like a ginger goblin before you die.
yeah, because that's
And-
totally a thing. But anyway,
Well, because dude, his hair did not. It turned fucking red.
his hair like
Like-
melted onto his head. His teeth like rotted, and like his face got all like scarred, and it was terrible. It was.
But
if
he
you, if
injected
you've never seen the
himself.
movie,
Like he
folks, look it up.
put
It's
it in
terrible.
he put it in like the like
No, if you've
the
never
gun
seen
and
the
was
movie,
like-
don't watch it.
Yeah, well, that too. Yeah, but anyway, that was the worst. That was the worst. I also think that they messed up Electro too. Personally, how they made him like this blue, like blob kind of thing. I don't know. Like I wasn't a fan of
All right,
that.
Electro was a jobber anyway, so who cares?
Well,
But Green Goblin was the
and also,
mainstay.
of course, they completely messed up the Rhino as well, because the Rhino is not a guy in a mech suit as he was portrayed as in this Spider-Man movie. He's supposed to have a skin suit, not a mech suit. But I digress. So
Did you guys see the
Skin
little label
suit.
on it that
What's
said Stark Tech?
yeah, that was Stark. The Rhino suit was Stark Tech. Yep, totally. So, but anyway, yeah. So I was gonna turn it over to you for more, Mitch, if you want to talk about like the actual story of the Amazing Spider-Man. Oh, one last before I do that.
Well,
though,
I mean, go ahead.
I was gonna say the one last thing that I have, that bone to pick I have with the movie, is how they did Gwen Stacy's death. But I'll let you take the lead on that, and also as well as give your thoughts.
Well, I mean, it's kind of a big and a small deal at the same time, because Gwen Stacy's death happened about 99.9% as far as like the comics go, because yes, I'll start with the similarities and end where it differs,
Right.
and then explain as to why it's kind of a big deal, but not really.
Right.
So she's falling.
Yep.
Spider-Man is struggling to get to her, and as far as like actually getting hands on her and grabbing her. So he shoots his web, and he grabs her by the torso.
Yep.
And as she continues to fall, and this is still in place with the movie, she gets caught to a degree in the movie where she does thud off the ground ever so slightly, but from that velocity, that's gonna kill you.
Yes.
In the comics, what actually happened was, because of the positioning of his webbing and the way that he grabbed her, with how fast as she was falling, she stopped before the pavement, but before she, like, instead of hitting the pavement, her head snapped back and she snapped her neck. Which, the reason why I say this is where it kind of turns into, it was a big lesson for Peter, not just in his grieving for what he was going through, like with losing her, because he did love her. It was, if he didn't do anything, she'd be dead anyway. But if he would have positioned his webbing in a different way,
it would have saved.
or considered like supporting the major, specifically her neck, as far as how he like grabbed her with his webbing. Or he could have like made more of an attempt to, instead of just catching her, but to like pull her.
Yeah, no, we get it. He could have done it differently to save her, but that's where like I think that ever so slight
But
difference
that was still
is a
his,
problem.
Like, that still helps his metamorphosis into becoming a better version of Spider-Man.
Right.
That's
So
why when you remove that, because he just felt like, oh, I didn't get to her in time.
well, that's what I was gonna say. Is in the movie, it's almost like it kind of wasn't even his fault because like she was gonna die anyway because like they made that change where she hits the ground like ever so slightly, and the implication is that's what kind of killed her. But as you pointed out in the comic, he is actually the direct reason that she dies in the comic, which
All right,
has a
all
much
right,
more
Mitch.
profound effect on him, I
All
think.
right, Mitch, you're wasting too much time picking nits. There's way too many nits to pick with this movie, and that's the least of which that matters.
Well, no, this isn't just a nit, but this is the only one I really care to waste time on.
Jesus.
It's just because it's so, it's
This is an important
It's
thing,
like-
in my opinion.
it's the only part of the movie that actually was really structurally sound to the comic
Well, that
itself,
too.
which
Yeah.
is the source
This was
material.
supposed to be
Well,
the
you're like,
Well, this
At
was
least
supposed to
they
be the
gave you
big
one.
deal of this movie too. Was like it was, being Gwen Stacy's death was supposed to be like the whole big deal of this movie, or the
and it's
know.
like,
Yeah.
the one thing they almost did right, they fucked that up too.
Yeah, that's the point, really. So, but actually, as a side note, I do want to just mention briefly the way that they marketed this movie. By the way, I don't know if you guys remember this, was fucking terrible because they literally almost basically showed you Gwen Stacy's death in the fucking trailer for this movie, which is complete bullshit in my opinion. But in the commercials for this movie, they also literally showed you the actual ending scene of the movie too, which I also think is bullshit. But anyway. Terrible
Yeah, I
marketing.
think it's one of the movies that had like it got flack for giving away too much because that was, I know how at this time was like the height of trailers giving away too much, and then it kind of went the other way where like now some of the trailers like you're like, what the fuck did I just watch?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like you're seeing the trailer, you think you're watching a commercial for like a car, and then it comes up and it's like The Outsiders 2.
Yeah, pretty much. So
you're like, oh, okay.
yeah, but anyway, yeah, and the other thing is like they were trying to, like, the one thing about building to the future, this movie that I didn't mention was like they were like trying to suggest toward the future of like, they were going to do the Sinister Six, which is something that they were kind of started to tease in the first Amazing Spider-Man, and then like all throughout the second one they had teasers for that too, but obviously they didn't get there because they got canceled, so it is, or they leased Spider-Man back to Disney. But the final thing I have to say about this movie, and then I know we're going to move on, is the fact that so the way that they ended this movie was complete horseshit also, in my opinion, because if they would have just ended it with Gwen Stacy's dead and then Spider-Man's like, oh, I'm going to hang up the costume because it's my fault, I'm never going to do this again, I could have accepted that, even, despite the inconsistency with, the actual way she died. But the fact that literally 2 minutes later, at the end of the movie, he hangs up the costume and then it's like, oh, the Rhino's in the mech suit and he's rampaging downtown, and he gets up, he's like, oh, well, duty calls, better get out there. And it's like, what the fuck? Like, you just invalidated your
No, they
entire
should have
movie.
cut in the. They should have cut in the scene of Tobey Maguire eating the hot dog.
Seriously, like they literally just invalidated, like, the whole basis of this movie was supposed to be centered around like, Gwen Stacy's death, and then like that's kind of triggers like the evolution of Spider-Man into, a better Spider-Man, as you pointed out, Mitch. But no, and they could have just ended this movie at that, with her dead and him hanging up the suit, and then if there was a next movie, which they were planning on there being a next movie, even though there wasn't a next movie, then they could have had him, put the suit back on and be better and all that stuff. But no, they had to ruin that even. So that last scene in the movie for me just like renders this whole movie completely pointless, and then they got canceled. So what the fuck? But I mean, that's pretty much all I got to say about that.
But I mean, there was also that there's also that horrible 70s walk in the movie.
Okay, we're getting
in
there.
last
We
place.
are getting there, bro. We are getting there. Okay, so I think we're done with the Amazing Spider-Man 2, unless you have anyone else has anything else to add to that. But okay, now we're going to move on. So moving on.
Put some dirt in your eye.
We are going to. I really hope, this is the one time that I hope Johnny has like some stupid shit queued up that he's gonna play when I introduce this movie, like, Funky Soul or something. But he probably doesn't, because it's the one time that I want him to. But anyway, coming in at number 6 on the list, we have Spider-Man 3.
We have the
I don't have
Amazing
anything
Spider-Man 2.
and then
Yeah,
we have.
I would have put Spider-Man 3 much higher than this on the list. Like, it's way better than you're giving it credit for. And I
So-
had nothing queued up because I don't want to make a joke of this masterpiece.
Well, thanks for that. Anywho, so since you're such a big fan of Spider-Man 3, Johnny, I'll let you take the lead on this one. So we're talking about Spider-Man 3. Obviously, a lot of problems with this movie. Although there were, I do agree with you. I think there are more good points in this movie than people do give it credit for. But however, this is the law of averages on the channel, as always with these lists. So. But yeah, if you want to go ahead and talk about Spider-Man 3, the floor is yours.
Yeah, so I thought this movie was better than you guys did, but I put it kind of near the middle, but you guys all thought it was terrible, so you had it like last, so I guess it averages out to second. But I overall, I rewatched this movie like not that long ago. I think it was like less than a year ago. I actually think I watched it on my birthday last year. And I didn't, it's okay to say it's not as bad as people make it out to be is like, it makes it sound like it's still terrible. But I think the main problems with this movie that I got from rewatching it were, number one, it has 3 villains that they try to all make kind of like the primary antagonist, and it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
Like, and the second thing I would say, the second biggest problem is probably Eric Foreman. Topher Grace's Venom is a horrible casting choice, but granted, I think with the direction they went with Eddie Brock, though I don't agree with it, and I know Mitch completely hates it.
Well, I
know
do
you
too,
all
but
both
go ahead.
completely hate it.
Yeah.
I think with the direction they decided to go with him, they did as good of a job as they could have. Like, it's like if they make a decision of, I don't have to agree with every decision.
Venom's dead. Ding
I don't
dong, Venom's dead.
I don't have to agree with everything they do, but as long as I think the execution of that part is actually pretty good. But I think I guess I'm gonna talk about the good. Like, I think Sandman, I think it was, this isn't good, but I think it was really fucking stupid how they retconned that Sandman was the guy who killed Peter's dad when he obviously wasn't.
It was Uncle Ben, but yeah.
Uncle Ben, yeah, Uncle Ben. Sorry, I don't know why I said his dad. His dad was dead before he was born, but or certainly after he was born. But
something like that.
Yeah, Uncle Ben getting killed by the Sandman was totally retconned and stupid.
Yes.
Because I'm pretty sure didn't they apply that like Peter killed the guy who
Yeah, so in the first Spider-Man movie, there was the guy who he let go when we'll talk about that more when we get to that movie, but yeah, he let the guy go from robbing the guy, and then he found that guy and did kill him, I think, in the first Spider-Man movie. So that was kind of like,
well, he didn't really kill him directly.
He kind of was intimidating him,
and then he
and
fell
he was
off.
walking
And he
towards him.
Yeah.
And then the guy fell off of the
legend died.
But he could have, obviously
he could have saved him, but he didn't. So, but my point is that was a big turning point for Spider-Man and his decision, not to kill anybody, and it was that.
Yeah,
moment.
because he didn't kill the guy. It's just
but he let him die.
He was very, he was very I don't know, kind of careless and didn't really, he just kind of was pushing the guy around.
Well, he was blinded with rage, and which is understandable, but that's why I said that was a big turning point for Spider-Man's character. That's definitely a manslaughter.
If they would have
caught him, he did scream when he saw the guy trip backwards and fall over and through the glass.
Yeah.
He did kind of lunge forward and was like, no, but then ran over to the window, saw the guy on the ground. Yeah. Saw the police coming and shit, and he didn't he had the moment where he, even in saying no, which is his instinct, he made the conscious decision to take vengeance or the law into his own hands in that moment by not reacting.
Right, and so it kind of, I think we can all agree that he basically indirectly killed the guy, which is something that is...
He just let it happen. He didn't...
Okay, well, hold on, I'm just trying to make my point. The whole reason why this point happened is because Spider-Man 3's retconning of this basically invalidated that big character moment.
Exactly, and that's, I think, one of the other reasons why Mitch and I put this movie lower on the list, but go ahead.
Yeah, and I can see that, but okay, I liked the design. I would say this, I liked the design and the execution of all of the villains. I liked the way the Sandman was, okay, I get it. It's 2007. The CGI is kind of dated, but I like the way they did it for the time. I like the design of Venom, not Eric Foreman, but the actual Venom suit and the black Spider-Man suit. And I
don't really like how they made Sandman on your topic of the villains. I don't really like how they made Sandman like kind of a villain you want to feel bad for.
They made him kind of almost like a tragic villain or like a tragic.
Yeah, but
character.
I personally I like that. I like the fact I thought it gave some variety. Again, the movie's overcrowded with trying to do too much shit.
Yeah.
I personally like the fact that the Sandman was made out to be a tragic villain. Now the problems with the movie are obvious.
Even in the comics, where the Sandman was one of the only super villains to ever kill Spider-Man by like turning into sand and going down his fucking throat and then expanding.
Well, so I will say this, like,
that's not a villain I want to feel bad for. Like,
well, no, like they completely.
If anything, they should have made Venom and Eddie Brock, obviously, like you said, casted better. But they should have made them more, because like that's supposed to be the anti-hero. Like at the end of the movie, Sandman gets away, but Venom fucking
I get it.
Venom dies.
Mitch wants everything to be more comic book accurate, but I don't care as long as it's well executed. And I don't think that. Obviously, there's a lot of problems with Spider-Man 3, but I think that I don't know. I think personally, Sandman's performance was one of the better things about the movie. The guy who was Sandman, it was I mean, I don't think he was great, but I thought he was better than and I thought honestly Topher Grace's performance was okay for what they were going for. Now the big negatives about the movie was obviously the overcrowding of too many villains. The story was okay, big thing that's important. He does all these crazy things when Peter has the symbiote, but they never really explain that it's the symbiote doing it. So if you don't have the pretense of knowing what the symbiote does from the comics or the Spider-Man cartoons, you're like, what the fuck is going on?
I think that was kind of implied. Whenever Peter would do something wrong, he would start to rub his chest.
Well,
but you're basing it on someone who read the comics and knows that. But honestly, I saw a lot of people complaining about this. Like, if you're someone who's never seen any Spider-Man stuff with the Venom thing before, it does not. I think
they definitely could have explained that stuff. Like the only really explanation.
But they did. They literally had a scene. They literally had a scene in the movie where his fucking professor calls him.
Dr. Connors says it amplifies characteristics like aggression. I was just about to say that. That's literally the only explanation we get for anything as far as the symbiote.
What other explanation do you need, though?
I mean,
it literally tells you what the suit does.
Right, okay, but I would have been happier if they would have spent a little more time kind of on that.
A little more time on one sentence that explains the concept of what a symbiote does to the human body.
Listen, I'll just wrap it up at the end of the day by saying, even all the good stuff about this movie comes with a qualifier, and that's the reason why, even for me, I like the fact that, because I like Tobey Maguire and he's my favorite Spider-Man. I like Tobey Maguire as Spider-Man, and he's my favorite Peter Parker / Spider-Man. Yeah. So I had this higher, but overall, the fact that anything good about this movie has to come with several qualifiers, I can see why it's ranked so lowly.
Yeah, so I want to say that I do
I'd say this. Hold on, just real quick on just off of what John said.
All right.
I agree. I feel like the script was good. Yeah. But I feel like it was poor execution.
And you took the words right out of my mouth.
I feel like I feel like they really had an amazing movie, and they were ready to put it forth, and then they decided to be like, hey guys.
I kind of disagree with that. I feel like the script is actually pretty bad. I feel like the concept of the movie and the characters are good, but I feel like the actual script and writing is kind of bad, but the character performances are good. You know what I mean?
I don't mean without
there's
any
other
tweaks,
weird shit where they make dumb script decisions. I know you hate the stupid Saturday Night Fever emo Peter Parker shit.
Yeah. What I hate even more than that though is the death of Venom. I even hate that in my own movies, on the DC side, when I see a villain die that's not supposed to die.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Venom's probably
now
you've
the
just
completely ruined any continuity to continue with that character that has so much depth.
Yeah, Venom's probably the #1 Spider-Man, definitely the #1 Spider-Man villain in my opinion that shouldn't die, because he does.
I said that'd be like killing the Joker.
Yeah, exactly. In the Batman world, that would be like the Joker dying, because there's just so much of a story.
Yeah, but haven't you ever seen what was it called? Oh, shit, there was I don't remember the name of it.
It was just called Batman.
No, wasn't it The Killing Joke? It was an animated Batman movie where he actually kills the Joker at the end of it. That was a really fucking, I forget the name of it. It was a really fucking good movie.
Yeah, but that was supposed to be set a really far in the future
Batman was already Batman was kind of over the hill at that point, but he wasn't like Batman Beyond old man yet.
Yeah, but that's my point, is doing something like that that's set like way in the future is a lot better than like he literally had like Venom existed in this movie for probably like 20 minutes and then he was dead. So like,
Okay, I
you
will
know.
say this. I think I know this is a huge tangent, but I do think that DC has a lot of really good animated movies.
Yeah,
I think I remember the one that you're talking about where
he
it
kills him.
wasn't Batman that killed the Joker.
I thought it was.
Yeah, it was.
No, and it was
No,
no, it
Joker.
was in it.
Well,
Listen, it was in the animated.
Joker actually finished himself off. So Batman like had Joker like on the brink of death, and then Joker like finished himself off because he's like he was said something about like how Batman couldn't do it because he's like, if you kill me, you're killing part of yourself or something like that, and then Joker like finished himself off.
Right.
Gotcha. Anyway, so yeah, that's that tangent. But okay, so to wrap up talking about Spider-Man 3, because I know our opinions of this thing have been all over the place, kind of as the movie was. I will say that yes,
Yeah.
I agree with you, Johnny, when about a lot of the stuff you said about this movie. That yes, there were a lot of good things about it. The overall feeling that I have about this movie is good idea, bad execution. Like you said, Mitch. It was, they had a lot of good ideas in the movie, and they just like the way they did, evil Peter Parker, like the way it came
Well,
out
hold on.
with
I
like,
think it was like this. The stuff that was like bad ideas was executed well, but the stuff that were good ideas were executed poorly. You know what
sure,
I mean?
yeah, I could see that, even though that doesn't make a lot of sense. But as far as like how they managed to reach that point in their production. But yeah, so yeah, I can see that. And like, so I actually do agree with what you said as far as the Sandman goes, because I think the part that the Sandman played in that movie was actually one of the better things about it. Although I will say that yes, that is nothing like what the Sandman was supposed to be from the source material. So, but like the Sandman, I don't know. He was kind of like not that big of a deal in my opinion, like in the source material. So like, I don't know. He was pretty one dimensional too. So like the fact that they created like a character that had that like tragic villain type of backstory, like I thought that was cool, even though it probably shouldn't have been the Sandman. But I thought that that whole thing pulled off pretty well. Um, you know, and yeah, obviously, I do think casting Topher Grace's Eddie Brock slash Venom was probably like one of the worst casting choices in like any superhero movie, in my opinion. Probably only second to like Hayden Christensen's Anakin Skywalker from Star Wars, but it was really bad. And also, like, I do get what you say, Johnny. Like, he did play, like, Topher Grace played like the like Eddie Brock the way they wanted him to play Eddie Brock, but the problem with that is that's not Eddie Brock. Like, that's not what Eddie Brock is supposed to be. Like, he's not supposed to be like some like sniveling like kiss ass, like, oh, Mr. Jameson, I want that staff job so bad. Like, no. Like, that's not that character. Like, everybody was out of character. Like, that's the problem. Like, that wasn't Eddie Brock slash Venom. The Sandman wasn't the Sandman. Like, fucking, I actually, one of the only characters in the movie that I actually thought was like done pretty well through and through was like the Green Goblin slash Harry Osborn slash New Goblin, because like he remained pretty consistent with what he was supposed to be. But like, although he shouldn't have died either, actually, which is another problem with the movie, is that like everybody dies that shouldn't die. Like, so
Again,
it's
great
like,
story, poor
yes,
execution.
yeah, so it's like, what the fuck, but yeah,
And
so
I think we've wasted enough time on this dumbass movie.
yeah, so I think we're good here with this. But yeah, I think that's why it's ranked, like, Mitch ranked this movie all the way down. I put it somewhere toward the middle of the bottom, and you put it like toward the middle, Johnny. So that's why it winds up in the middle of the average list. So there you go. Spider-Man 3. I mean, I had really high hopes for this movie too, and unfortunately, it just it was all over the place and it didn't live up. But it is
I
what it
remember
is.
when I saw the trailer of this movie, I was like, Sandman, and they got the symbiote, and they got the fucking Venom, and
Goblin.
like I thought it was gonna be like the best movie ever.
Yeah, I think a lot of people thought that
Or
too.
was I wrong?
Yeah, well, you're not the only one. I had similar feelings when I heard about it coming out, and then unfortunately, it was one of those times it just didn't live up. But what can you do? We got a lot of funny memes out of it, so it is what it is. So, moving on, we are going to come to number 5 on the list, and coming in at number 5, we have The Amazing Spider-Man. So that is the first one with Andrew Garfield, and that was from 2012. So, I'll kind of start off with this one. I don't have a ton to say about this movie, but I will say, overall, this wasn't a bad movie. I actually had a really hard time placing this one versus Spider-Man 3, to be honest, because I think they're of a similar production quality, but I think at the end of the day, I have less bad things to say about this movie, which is why I think I rank it higher. And I know Mitch liked this movie a little more as well, so that's why it kind of moves up, is a little bit higher. Um, but yeah, I will say I did like the actual story of this movie, like the fact that it was, linear progression, easy to follow, everything kind of made sense. Even though I will say I do think they kind of messed up the lizard in this movie. Like I absolutely, I know this might be a nitpick for some of you guys, but I absolutely hated the character design of the lizard in this movie because he was naked and he had no lizard snoot. And god damn it,
Well,
if you know
I
the
personally
lizard,
think
he's supposed to have a lizard snoot, and he didn't
well, I
have it.
personally think the worst thing about the lizard was the fact that he had like a healing. His healing factor was like better than Wolverine.
Yeah, that was a big problem too. Well,
Like he
also
was
like
literally he was like fucking
he was like
revival
invincible.
jam.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was basically fucking invincible.
Well, that's the other thing. Well, yeah. Speaking about the lizard, I will say, as far as casting goes, I think the guy they got to play Kurt Connors, like that British guy with like the long hair and shit, like I feel like he was a significantly worse choice for Kurt Connors than the guy who played Kurt Connors in Spider-Man 3 for like 2 scenes. So I think that was another problem I had with that. But yeah, also making the lizard like the main and only villain of the
I don't
movie.
have much to say about this movie
Yeah.
personally because I think it's like I think it's like the most mediocre of any of them. Like there's
Yeah.
nothing horrendously bad about it, but there's nothing good about it either.
Yeah, I would more or less agree with you there. Actually, that's pretty much it. I mean, I did so some other things I did
And
like about them.
honestly,
I like the
the
fight
biggest
scenes. I
problem with
like the
this movie,
dynamic with Peter dating Gwen and like her dad being the police captain and all that, jazz. I thought that was, fine. But yeah, I do agree with you overall that this movie was outstandingly mediocre, which is kind of why it falls toward the middle of the list, I
and
think.
I personally think that the biggest problem with this movie actually is the fact that it came out at like the height of the MCU and it was not involved in the MCU.
Yeah, that's right. It came out the same year that the original Avengers came out in 2012, so it was
Yeah, it was
like
right when they really like hit their stride in the or starting to hit their stride with the MCU, and it was not even like affiliated.
yeah, that was definitely bad timing. Yeah, I agree with you there. Um, Mitch, I don't know if you'd want to weigh in on the Amazing Spider-Man because I know you actually had not like a super high opinion of the movie, but you liked it.
Well, I liked it. I compared it to in my when I what I expect when I expect to watch a Spider-Man movie,
Mhm.
and they had a lot of things right as far as plot points and stuff like that. I do agree that they could have done better on the characters. I'm not as hard on the whole look like a crocodile to be a
Mhm.
crocodile, like because at the end of the day he's a mutation.
Yeah.
But so it doesn't bother me that much. But I mean, I could see I could see where that'd be annoying. But overall, the movie, I don't have too much to say about it because it was pretty much a very general, you know, Spider-Man movie where he's trying to get the girl and father's in the way and
Yeah.
then like
It's pretty
even when you
flatline.
think it's gonna even when you think it's gonna end happy, it rarely ends happy for our heroes because like daddy's dying words or stay away from Gwen and shit. Like you know what I mean. So I think the fact that he like didn't listen to it too, which was like
Which
awesome.
eventually caused her death.
Yeah, like daddy called it and shit.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's
But other than that, not really too much to say about the movie. But I feel like that's where it ended up because uh, there was just enough there for it to be like, they could have done better.
fair enough. So I don't know if you have anything else you want to say about it, Johnny.
I was gonna say that I heard a lot of people when the movie came out, and later on even more so, that they hated the design of his suit in this movie.
Hmm.
I personally actually liked the design of the suit in this movie because it was very different. I'm not saying it's my favorite Spider-Man suit design, but I didn't mind it. I
Yeah,
liked
I
the fact that it was different.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I don't know. I mean, I had mixed feelings about the suit. I think it's definitely one of my least favorite Spider-Man suits that we've seen in any of these movies, but I didn't hate it, honestly. Like, I thought it did definitely pop a little more than the other ones, but I don't know. It was like I said, most everything with this movie is just kind of like a flatliner. So like as which is kind of what we've been saying. Not really anything too crazy to say about it in either direction, which is why it kind of falls where it does on the list. So, but yeah, I think that wraps up that movie pretty well. So we're gonna move on then. So I will say, in my personal opinion, there's a big quality divide between the three movies that we just talked about and the next four we're going to talk about. Because I feel like the next four are of a noticeably and significantly higher quality than the
Well,
first
except
three
for
that
maybe
we
one.
talked about. That's just my personal opinion. I think that the next four movies that we're going to talk about are much better, distinctly better than the last three that we talked about. Um, so we're going to get to number four on the list. So smack dab in the middle. And coming in at number four, we have Spider-Man: Homecoming. So this was the first Tom Holland Spider-Man back from 2017. He had already appeared, as we mentioned, in Cap Civil War prior to this, so we already knew. But this is like a new Spider-Man essentially, because they didn't want to keep redoing the same story all over again. So they didn't want to reuse the villains either, or anything like that. So yeah, there's a lot of like this just feels very different. And every Spider-Man, I don't know if we really touched on this earlier. I don't think we did, but like every Spider-Man rendition that we've seen has kind of been based on like a different arc of the comics. Like obviously the Tobey Maguire Spider-Mans are based on like classic Spider-Man essentially, and the Andrew Garfields were based on the actual Amazing Spider-Man comic series, of course. And then this one with Tom Holland is a little different though. It's a little weird because it's integrated with all the Avengers stuff. I see like a resemblance more to like the Spectacular Spider-Man, which is like more of a new age Spider-Man, but it does a lot of its own thing as well too. So, and it's tied in so well with the MCU also. So it's kind of like that's always a plus. But yeah, so I have to say I actually really really enjoyed this movie. I actually saw this movie several times. And I really enjoyed it because the whole storyline, it was very logical progression, and everything made sense, and everything was the character building and development was great, like especially the relationship between like Peter and Tony was like obviously at the forefront of everything in this movie. So like kind of like the father son relationship there, which is always cool to see play out. So yeah, I like the fact that how they did the Vulture in this movie, because like the Vulture was kind of like a throwaway villain, from Spider-Man historically from like the source material, but they did a really good job, in my opinion, of like modernizing him and making him feel like a credible threat, which is another reoccurring theme that we're going to talk about a little farther up the list too. But yeah, I really really did enjoy this movie. Quite a lot, and it also set up for the future, as the MCU movies tend to do also. And this was like a big deal because like you mentioned, Johnny, like pretty much all throughout the Amazing Spider-Man and the Amazing Spider-Man 2, like it was kind of like that was on the outside looking in of the MCU, so everybody was pretty disappointed in that. So I think looking back on it, people were kind of like predisposed to be disappointed in the Amazing Spider-Man movies, just because um, those movies were not part of the MCU. And like you said, that was like right when the MCU was hitting its stride and like blowing up and gaining all this popularity. So like people were really looking forward to Spider-Man being brought into the MCU, and that's kind of, even though Spider-Man debuted, or Tom Holland's Spider-Man debuted in Captain America: Civil War, this being his
Also,
first
hold on.
standalone was a big deal.
You totally forgot to mention when we were talking about Spider-Man 3. Give me rent.
Yeah, we didn't mention Give Me Rent. Well, I did hat tip to the memes, but we didn't mention Give Me Rent. We didn't mention Funky Soul. We didn't mention a
Bully
lot of stuff.
Maguire.
But yeah, Toby Maguire. Um, but Bully
Bully
Maguire,
Maguire.
yes, obviously. But yeah, if you want to pick it up on that note of Spider-Man: Homecoming, you know.
I was only reminded because of the meme where he's like, "Oh, is little Iron Man Jr. gonna cry?"
Yeah. Okay, but I was just about to turn it over.
Okay, so honestly, I'm okay in Spider-Man. This is why I think one of the reasons I think Far From Home is far superior to Homecoming is because I just do not like the way Spider-Man is portrayed as like Tony Stark's son in the MCU. Like I
Okay.
get what they're going for, that like, oh, like he's, they're making into one an emotional. They want them to have like an emotional connection, so it hits harder, when Peter dies or when Tony dies, or they both died at one point, right? Whatever.
Not at the same time, but yes, they had both died at different points in
Yeah,
time.
yeah. So you can see the other one's reaction, but honestly, like, it's so unlike the Spider-Man character. It was like, and I get like, okay, Tom Holland is funny, and Tom Holland and Robert Downey Jr. have good
Chemistry.
chemistry.
Yep.
Yeah, but like, I just that just the way that's all portrayed and done is just I don't.
It's too much for you.
It rubs me
Is
the
that what you're
wrong
saying?
way, and I don't get it, and like, it makes Spider-Man look like a whiny baby instead of like, a guy who's just a kid who doesn't. He looks more like a freaking like a whiny baby. And the thing about Spider-Man is like he was supposed to be poor and he was supposed to struggle, and he just has fucking Tony Stark bankrolling him. It kind of destroys like a large part of what made the character what he was. Like in Far From Home, the reason why I like that much better is because Tony Stark is gone, and he really is like on his, like, especially like after he finds out that like he's basically cut off from all the Stark technology. He's pretty much on his own, and he has to operate like Spider-Man would, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I can.
So I
I
don't know.
actually do get what you're saying. I really do. And like, I to a very small extent, because I'm one of those people that really did slash do enjoy like the Tony slash Peter relationship arc that they
A
played
lot of
through.
people do.
But like, I do kind of almost get, and to a very small extent agree with your point. Like, it's almost a little too much, because Spider-Man was always a more stand on your own 2 feet type of hero. And he is more, he did definitely take more of a backseat to Iron Man, especially in this movie. So I do get where you're coming from there 100%.
It's
Like I
not even that
said.
he takes a backseat to Iron Man. I mean, the focus story is obviously focused on Spider-Man entirely, but like it's almost like he always has like his fucking like his get out of jail free card as Tony Stark. Right? Like you're
Right.
like, oh, none of this is really like high stakes, because the real battling is going on with the Avengers, and like, Tony Stark, if he really gets in danger, Tony Stark will always come save him at the last minute.
Yeah, well, actually, it's funny you should say that, because that did even happen in one scene in this movie in Homecoming, where like
Mhm.
Spider-Man goes in the water and then like the Iron Man suit flies out and saves him. So it's like, or he
Exactly.
gets like too high and he can't, and then he falls and goes in the water. So yeah, it's I do get what you're saying. Like I said, and to a small extent, I do agree, because it's almost like it's a little too much. Like they're laying it on just a little too thick for my taste,
And
even. But
like, all right, I know this, and again, it's kind of the thing is like if the execution is good and it makes sense and like it's different from the source material, I'm fine with that.
mhm.
But here, I don't know. It's just I'm just not as much, because it's just, and also, um, I think Tom Holland is kind of like like I know Andrew Garfunkel. I don't like his portrayal of Peter Parker, and I think he's okay as Spider-Man. And
Yeah.
like I like Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker, and I think he's okay as Spider-Man, but he's probably better as Peter Parker.
Mhm.
But I'm kind of torn on whether or not I actually, especially in this movie, on whether or not I actually like Tom Holland as Spider-Man. Like I like him, but like it's also because everybody else likes him, so I'm like, how can you not like him?
Yeah.
Right? But like,
Yeah.
and because the MCU and all the movies are so well done and stuff, and the story is so continuative and has some good continuity and everything, and like the actual nuts and bolts of the way everything's put together is very good, but it's just like, I don't know, man. He's not like, I don't
He's not
he's not
exactly
the
what you want
Spider-Man.
out of Spider-Man, I guess is what I'm
Yeah,
hearing.
he's
Like,
not. Yeah, like I said, because Spider-Man, like before the MCU, Spider-Man was my favorite comic book character, and
Yeah.
my favorite comic book hero. And in the MCU, he's really not. Like I can't find myself saying like, oh yeah, Tom Holland Spider-Man is like my favorite superhero. Like no,
Right.
definitely not.
So I think I do get where you're coming from there, but I think maybe part of the reason for that is because they have big plans going forward, and they want you to like follow like the maturation process and like the journey of him. So I think by the time they're done with Tom Holland
But it's
Spider-Man,
stupid because they
you're
did it
gonna
ass
see
backwards.
that. You're gonna see
But
that.
they did it like ass backwards because they started out with him having like a fucking rich ass fucking daddy,
Yeah.
his fucking his muscle daddy Tony Stark.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, obviously the future remains to be seen, but I think that's what they're kind of going for as far as like him being
Like
protected, and then
imagine
like
if Captain America the first movie, like instead of him being a soldier who stands on his own, like he fucking I don't know, like Robert Stark, because like Tony Stark's dad or his
that's
grandfather,
Howard Stark.
like
But anyway, go ahead.
yeah, Howard Stark, whatever, whoever Howard Stark's dad, whatever.
Yes.
He just gives them all like this futuristic technology for the 40s, like it's like steampunk 40s technology that's like makes that he turns into Captain America because he's a super soldier, but he also gets all this advanced technology than him, and he has him to bail his ass out at the end of it. It would just ruin Captain America. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I get what you're saying. I do. Mitch, I know you've been pretty quiet, so I don't know if you want to weigh in on Spider-Man: Homecoming here.
Well, I mean, I enjoyed it because I like kind of how they paid homage to like the first movie where like Peter Parker, Tobey Maguire's version, was like drawing and trying to like figure out a costume and was like putting things together. But at the end of the day, after I believe it was the only one you got to see really was like the wrestling one that he did, and
Yeah.
then after that, it kind of went into like somehow he made this awesome suit. Um, but in the first movie, I like how they kind of tipped their hat to
It's a classic
you know
Spider-Man.
exactly. I love when a movie does that. It shows respect to the reason it's kind of there and potentially has something to build upon. But I mean, overall, again, a good movie. I enjoyed Robert Downey's time in the movie, especially when he was essentially telling Spider-Man he knows he's Spider-Man, and you know
When
pulls
he
down
takes
the
the
string
suit,
in
I
the
think
for
is
the
one of
editing.
the best scenes and most iconic scenes from that
Oh
movie.
yeah, where he's like, if you really cared, you'd be here and for real, and he like walks out the suit. It was kind of like a hold my beer moment, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
Um, but at the same time, I liked towards the end of the movie. Well, I guess the end of the movie where like I guess he still thinks he's getting tested for whatever reason, and
And he
he like
turns him down.
presents him with like with the Iron Spider suit and like how how he was like like he was all amazed at first and he was like this is a test or something like that and turns him down and like then Pepper comes in and she's like we got this all the media out here. He's like yeah, and then they figure out something else to tell him, but
Hmm.
it was a proud moment for Tony Stark and Happy, I believe, but
Yep.
um again, an overall good movie. Didn't have too much bad going on in that for me.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. Definitely. I think it's definitely
Like the one complaint I guess I do have is like I get that you do an origin story over and over again and it kind of contains certain
oh, you
aspects
wanted to see
over
Uncle
and
Ben
over
die
again.
again?
Yeah, because that that's kind of like taking out, which I guess they're actually doing in the new Batman movie. They're not having the part where like the origin of that character needs to be known, or else like then you don't know why they're doing what they're doing. You know what I mean?
Well, I think they'll definitely make reference to it, but yeah, I get you.
All right, whatever. I think we spent a good amount of time on this movie.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm comfortable with that. So yeah, overall, I think it's great. I although um one other thing I do want to mention is and this is going to be a
Spider-Man
reoccurring
3 is
theme
better.
into no, not that, but I will say that I think that some of the casting choices in this movie are actually pretty off, and that's going to be a reoccurring theme in the next Tom Holland Spider-Man that we'll get to up the list a little bit. Um, yeah, but I don't.
Yeah, why does everybody give this movie such a pass for everything? That's the like
So I think
it
it's what you were
botches
talking
Spider-Man's
about,
origin.
where you said that like you're fine with changing the source material as long as they do it in a good way and it makes the story good and everything comes together. So, but I will say that it does chafe me a little bit some of the changes they made. So like, one of the big ones is obviously how they did quote unquote MJ or Mary Jane. Like I'm not crazy about how they're doing her in these movies, because like not only are they obviously changing her look, but they're also changing her personality, her attitude to be not what Mary Jane was in the source material. So that's not great. I mean, don't get me wrong, she's a fine character in her own whatever. The character she plays, Michelle slash MJ, in these movies, which is like she's MJ but she's not Mary Jane, which is a weird situation. But I will also say that I'm not crazy. Like that's a fine character in her own right, but that's not what the Mary Jane character is supposed to be. She's not really like this like kind of like I don't even know how you would describe her, like almost like a downer, like dark, mysterious,
He's
like
like an emo kid.
yeah, like that, and like that's not Mary
I don't
Jane. Mary
personally
Jane's
again.
like a singer,
I
like
don't care about
actress,
that.
like that kind of thing.
Hold up. I am perfectly fine with that. I don't care about that
Okay.
because like whatever they can change the way his love interest is. I don't care. Again, like I said, what I care about is the entire dynamic and the character of Spider-Man was basically bastardized by this movie.
Well, I wouldn't go that far,
And I
but
think I think the only reason they did it was so they could fucking shoehorn him into Civil War.
well, I mean, they definitely. I will say, Civil War. Well, they were definitely in a hurry to get Spider-Man into the MCU. That's a given. But yeah, a couple other characters. I just want to mention this, and then we'll move on. Again, like the way they changed Flash Thompson, who's supposed to be like Spider-Man's like bully in school, and like instead he's like he's like like he's a nerd like Peter Parker essentially, except he's just kind of a jerk. So I didn't like how they did that.
No, he's like a rich kid. That's the other thing that doesn't even make sense. He's like a rich kid, but fucking Spider-Man's getting bankrolled by Tony Stark.
So obviously he's richer. Yeah, so
Yeah, so it doesn't even it makes the impact of him being a heel even it makes it seem like oh
less
Spider-Man's like
important.
basically a heel as well.
Yeah, so yeah, and like the fact that he's not like this big muscle-bound like jock bully, which is what he's supposed to be again historically, don't like that too much. And also the fact that
Again, I wouldn't care about that. It's just the fact that like he seems like he could be a
his
rich
character is
douchebag bully, but
diminished
the fact
because of it is what yeah, is the point.
his
Yeah.
character is diminished because fucking Spider-Man has more money than him.
Well, and also I'm not crazy about the fact that they basically like what they did with Aunt May, which is like basically turning her from like the wise old lady into like my friend's hot mom essentially. So
They
like
made her a MILF.
yeah, so like I'm not again like it's just like I get what they're trying to do. They're trying to modernize Spider-Man and like change the story and meet status quos and appeal to the everybody, and I understand that. I do, and I don't even hate it to be honest. But like there's just some things just they change so much, and like there's a level of change that you're just kind of like you maybe you went a little too far. But again, if they make a good product around it, it kind of is what it is. But moving on.
Look, again, I will counter you again and say that I think they can change as much as they want as long as the execution is good. And I would argue that the execution of like MJ is fine.
Yep.
Aunt May, questionable. Flash Thompson, not good.
Fair enough. So, moving on, we're going to come to number 3 on the list. And coming in at number 3, we have Spider-Man, the original from way back in 2002. So, this was the first Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie. This is a classic, and in every sense of the word. And I'll say, I really like this movie. This is definitely another movie that I have way more positive things than negative things to say about it. I love the story of this movie, like watching the character progression. Like you pretty much got like you got so many classic scenes and stories and plot points and character progression. Like this was kind of like starting at ground zero with Spider-Man, as it should have been, because this was like the first live action Spider-Man, unless there was some really bad one in the '90s that I don't know about. But But yeah, so it was just a really it was a really good movie, especially for the time even. You got to see the whole thing about him, getting bit by the spider, turning into Spider-Man, wrestling Macho Man, which was awesome. um, you know, and then, Uncle Ben dying, which is, again, as we talked about already when we were talking about Spider-Man 3, a plot point that Spider-Man 3's retcon kind of ruined, but still, nonetheless, we're going to focus on how great it was executed in this movie because that's a much happier thought. In any event, so we have all that going down. Great. I love the way that they did the Green Goblin in this movie / Norman Osborn. With the tech and everything, and all that great stuff. And how he Willem Dafoe did a great job as the Green Goblin. I think the casting for this movie was definitely very spot on with everybody. With obviously Tobey Maguire did a great job, and Willem Dafoe, and everybody else too, MJ and Harry and the whole 9 yards. Just really, really awesome. The one thing I do have to say, and this is a nit to pick, but this is one thing that sticks out in my mind that does kind of knock this movie down a little bit, and it is a small thing, but it actually is it. If you think about it, is it really a small thing? It's one of those types of deals, and that is um, the whole Spider-Man's webbing thing. So like everybody should know that in the source material, Spider-Man's webs have always been manufactured by Spider-Man. He has web shooters under his suits, and he has cartridges that he has to replace that he himself created. All of that stuff, he created his web shooters and his web fluid and his cartridges and all that kind of stuff. And so that's a big part of Spider-Man. So in this movie, for whatever reason, and this carries throughout all the Tobey Maguire Spider-Mans, for whatever reason, they decided to have the web fluid come right out of him instead of him manufacturing his own.
It's not
tech.
fluid when it comes out of him though. That would be weird.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
So,
see,
but
it's kind of like on what John said. Like, it's not against protocol to change a plot point as long as you make it good. So I think if they wanted to be realistic with it, I'd be okay with it if he was like swinging around with it coming out of his ass.
yeah, but it's like, why does it specifically come out of like his wrist? You know what I mean? Like,
And
if
like
it
and like
comes right
and
out
like
of
it
him.
made a fart noise and shit as like every time it came out.
Dude, I'm pretty sure I saw like a cartoon of that somewhere where he like farted out like a web or something like that.
As a
Seriously.
joke.
That'd be
I don't-
awesome.
As a joke to what they did in this. And as a side note, I have to say, and I just realized this the other day, I think they actually were making reference to this in Captain America: Civil War when the Falcon's fighting Spider-Man, and he like shooting the webs on him, and he's like, "Is this stuff coming out of you?" And it's like, well, it's not supposed to be, but if back in the day of Tobey Maguire, it was coming out of him. So, but
Yeah.
again, it's a nit to pick, but I think that it does diminish the story in a sense, because like that kind of showed you like the techie, like the genius of Peter Parker is the fact that he made the web fluid, he made the web shooters, he did all that, you know what I mean? And now it's just like it's awkward that it's just coming right out of him, but anyway. But yeah,
I mean, I
overall,
get that, but listen,
yeah.
can I give my opinion on this?
Oh yeah, I was just gonna turn it over to you. Go for it.
So I think that okay. First of all, I think you are in a lot of ways, and despite the fact I really like this movie, I think you're actually overrating this movie in a lot of ways.
Mm,
I think the one reason why it's so high on my list is because it gets major brownie points for three major things.
mm,
Number one is it's basically the first good Marvel movie, and it kind of like started the whole superhero renaissance of superhero movies. How in the 90s there was all the cartoons, and then in the 2000s there started to actually be like good superhero movies, right?
right.
So there's that. The second thing is the fact that it, in terms of like the design and the characters and just the overall feel of the movie, stayed very authentic to the source material, with besides your web shooter thing aside.
Yes.
And even that, like the things they changed, like I feel like that was, I don't have a problem with them changing that because it was explained and it was like a part of it, it made sense in the universe. Like the worst thing is when they change things, they don't explain it and it doesn't make sense in the universe. But
Well, of course,
it's like
yeah.
they explained it and it made sense in the universe, and so on and so forth. And the third thing I'll say is I think the casting for the movie was actually really good. I would say, like, I mean, Tobey Maguire is a great, especially in the first movie. I mean, in the later movies, when he started getting older, it's questionable at some
Yeah.
points, like especially the third one.
Yeah,
Um,
that was another thing we failed to mention about the third one. It's like it's like
Tobey Maguire's in his
Mr.
30s,
Ditkovich,
and
it's
he's
like
supposed to
he
be.
is a good boy, and he's like 35, but he's a good boy. So, yeah, but go
Yeah,
on.
I mean, I get Tobey Maguire looks like a small person, but whatever. You know, I think MJ was cast like she just Kirsten Dunst or whatever the fuck her name is. I don't know, man.
Perfect.
Like I know she's not really a great actress, but she
Perfect
as
for the
MJ
role.
just worked really well. Willem Dafoe is fucking amazing as the Green Goblin. He's probably one. He was probably like one of the original great villain castings that they had.
Yep.
Even having freaking James Franco as Harry Osborn worked
Oh,
way
and
better in this
I
movie
mean,
than
we're
Spider-Man
missing
3.
the huge elephant in the room too. J.K. Simmons, J. Jonah Jameson. I don't know how
Oh my God, yes. Oh my God, yeah. He is like
How did we forget about that?
so
Holy fuck.
fucking good. Like I said, this movie, just the casting and the performances of the characters.
He's actually,
Okay, and now
I'm pretty convinced that him playing J. Jonah Jameson is actually like if God had a face, that's what it would look like. Is J.K. Simmons playing J. Jonah Jameson? Like it's
yeah, but
perfect, and so many iconic scenes from all of that stuff that were played out. Like
well, they say you can't look God in the eye, but
yeah,
I would say that like this kind of ties into the kind of the main criticism that this movie gets, and that's that it's like too campy and it's too like like some of the scenes, like when Green Goblin busts into Aunt May's house and she's like screaming like "Ooh!" It's like all like
it's a
kind
little
of weird
too
and
it's a
campy.
little too much.
Too much. It's too
It's
much.
almost like
Yeah.
it's too accurate to the comics.
Yeah, it's like you're reading like it's like this is like 10-year-old me's interpretation of what the comics should be like. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Which
but
is
that, I
kind
mean,
of too much.
but is that
But in a way,
really a
it's cool. But
bad
in a way,
thing
it's too
though? If
much.
you think about it, is that really a bad
I
thing?
know the camp and some of some of the lines and some of the dialogue and stuff and the some of the stuff is really campy. But personally, like I mean, I'm a big fan of like 60s Star Trek, so like I like campy stuff and like fucking like Adam West Batman with like the pow and the thwack and everything like that. Like so I honestly like this is not really even that campy to me.
Yeah,
So
fair enough. Mitch, I know you were pretty big fan of this movie too. So I don't know if you want to throw your 2 cents in the mix.
I'll just say when this movie came out, I was so disappointed that mom and dad did not let us go see it.
Yeah, we were in the younger bracket at that point, and it was like, we don't feel like going to the movies. It's like,
I remember going to see this movie in theaters, and I believe
screw you, man.
my family was my family. No,
I
didn't miss
would
anything
personally, I was never more disappointed that I didn't see a movie in theaters than this movie.
I can
well,
understand.
I
that.
mean, you don't understand. We get to this theater. It is so beyond crowded, and like
With good reason.
even there's just no chairs, and like you had to get people to move so you can get like groups together. Like the assholes that try to sit like in the middle of like
And they
not even,
leave like a
in the-
seat between them and their friend.
Yeah. And it was fucked up. So, but
was it worth it?
Yes and no though, because part of the experience for me was ruined because I guess because of where I was and the demographic. Let me just say, man, the stereotype's true. There was a lot of oh shits and what and all this stuff as I'm watching, and people are rude. That's why they have those commercials. You know what I mean? And don't be obnoxious. I was in a theater with obnoxious people, and it was fucked up. But aside from that, got to see the movie, and
it made all your
theaters,
childhood
so
dreams come true, because that's how I felt when I
that's
saw
a
it.
plus. Well, I mean, it
More or
was
less.
amazing watching it on the big screen,
Yeah.
and yeah, I think they did. I liked how they had the conflict with like the Goblin actually being like a counter, like kind of like how Venom is like with Wii and shit, but like instead, it's like the Goblin
Oh, like Norman
Kinda
Osborn and the
has
Goblin, like that duality of the character. Yeah.
Yeah, how like he would have those conversations with himself in the
Yeah.
mirrors and
And
shit.
I
You know
like
what I
how in the
mean? Like,
beginning it was kind of like him and the Goblin were like against each other, but then it kind of became like they
yeah.
were the same. They became like one and the same.
Yep.
And I feel like that's where they did very well with a villain that you should honestly feel bad for, because he was fine and everything before the military started pressing him and threatening to like revoke his contract and
But
like
it's like you simultaneously felt bad for him, but you also had no problem hating him.
But that's great though. Like that's what you want.
that's what makes a good villain in my opinion.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Actually, I know I didn't say this at the offset of this, but like I'm gonna say it now. It actually does pain me to say that like I couldn't put this movie any higher, but like it because it is just a great movie overall. And like yeah, I get it has little problems and inconsistencies with it, but like there's it,
Personally, I think the dialogue just being like, and some of the shit just being really cheesy, kind of like, I don't know, in terms of like it being a great movie, it's like, it's not like a great movie,
but it's a
but
great
it's like a great
Spider-Man
Spider-Man movie.
movie.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Which at the end of the day, isn't that why we're all here? So
True.
You watch movies to have fun and be entertained, not be like, well, look at how fine this cinema is.
yeah, well, yeah, well, that's us anyway, but not us, but yeah. So I think that pretty well covers that movie. But yeah, it's just a I would say great Spider-Man movie. Yes, maybe not great cinematic masterpiece, but like definitely very good cinematic
Also, I
display.
will say like the special effects for the time and the practical effects were really well done. Like
Oh
I
yeah.
was like, there's no way it'll ever get any better than this.
Oh, when they had him swinging through the air and attaching to the
Yes,
buildings and
yes.
shit, and like, yeah, and you were almost like, is he really doing that? Like,
Yeah, they did a
that was
great job with
incredible.
everything. There's no question about it. They really did.
And then you played the PlayStation 2 game and you were like, wow, these graphics kind of suck.
Yeah, and then you
Yeah.
played the PlayStation 4 game, and you're like, this is why I have to buy a PlayStation.
Well, if you're
Yeah.
you, that's what happened with you. So I can
You never even
understand.
played the PlayStation 4 Spider-Man, Bernard, did you?
I never got to
It's
it. No,
fucking
It's
incredible.
so good.
that's what I hear from everybody, and I tend to believe
I've
you.
never talked to anybody who's played that game and didn't think it was amazing.
Yeah,
It's
same.
Like I
it's
literally
a
had a
literal
client who she was
masterpiece.
like, I had a client who's like in her 40s and her kid is like a teenager and she's like, I literally just watched my kid play that game and I think it's awesome.
Well, there you go. That does speak volumes. Absolutely.
And
Definitely.
that goes back to the point of like the Tobey Maguire movie where like him swinging around and stuff was just iconically for that time it was like whoa, because like
Dude,
Well, I agree with
that's
Johnny
what
actually.
LOL.
made
Is
the
it
Spider-Man.
did kind of like spark like a renaissance of like superheroes almost because it's like superheroes were not like at the forefront of really
Well,
anything at this point in time.
even
Like you
directors of
got
other
classics.
superhero movies have like watched this movie and were like, holy shit, it's possible.
Yeah.
Yep.
Let's
That's
give this a
also true.
shot.
I remember when this came out, people were like, "Oh, you can't make superheroes like in live action because it just doesn't work. You
Yeah.
can't make it seem like as you can't make them seem as big or see you can't make their powers really do justice in live action, right?"
Hmm.
Yep.
And then this came along.
This
So
movie proved them
And then
wrong,
along
and
came
and
a
it, it, it
spider.
it
yes.
gave way to great movies such as Elektra and Blade.
Oh,
You know, the
stop.
first what was the bad one? There's one of those that was really
There
bad,
was a
and
Punisher movie
also
back there that was bad too.
Daredevil.
Catwoman,
Yep, that.
Catwoman,
Yep.
all those great movies.
There was a lot of bad
Well, there's a
movies
rock.
back then.
It was a rocky road getting to the MCU.
Yeah, it really was. But yeah, I think that sums up this movie pretty well. So we're gonna move on. So we're up to number 2 on the list, and coming in at number 2, we have Spider-Man: Far From Home. So that is, of course, the second Tom Holland Spider-Man movie, the newest. Not only Spider-Man movie, but also newest movie in the MCU to date. Came out last summer, and thanks to all the great stuff going
Well,
on in the world, we haven't gotten anything else since then. But
well, Black Widow's finished and should have been released months ago.
yes, well, yeah, but they wanted to wait. But in any event, yeah, so we have Far From Home, and I think we all agreed This movie is definitely up there because it's kind of it's kind of what you want over like for a second movie of like a series, because this is the second movie in the series of Tom Holland Spider-Man's. So it just feels kind of like an upgrade over the first one in pretty much every way, and that's kind of what you want. So it's like, they kind of ironed out like some of the problems that we're having. Like, Spider-Man is kind of forced to be alone and stand on his own 2 feet in this one, which is something that you didn't really see too much of in the first one. In Homecoming, that is. So it's just a really solid movie overall. Like, again, it's an MCU movie, so it's gonna be, you know, 99.99% of the time very well done, exceptionally well done, in every aspect. The tie-ins with everything else. You know, the story was great, from start to finish. It was a logical progression. I did love the way that they, and this is something that I said about the Vulture in Spider-Man: Homecoming, and I'll say the same thing about Mysterio in Far From Home, is that I love the way that they did him in this movie. That they took like a throwaway Spider-Man villain essentially, and they turned him into a credible threat, and they modernized him in a way that made sense, and it was really enjoyable to watch. So, I did enjoy what they did with him in this movie. I did say this before, and I'll say it again. I was actually disappointed that they killed him off, because I think Jake Gyllenhaal did a fantastic job as Mysterio, and I would have liked to see him come back and do it again. But
See, that's an example of like where they did not follow the source material well, but they did the execution correctly.
yes, definitely. But I'm actually going to throw it over to Mitch this time, because actually Mitch, in his list, ranked this movie was his favorite of all the Spider-Man movies. But Johnny and I had a little bit of difference of opinions there with him. But I'm going to let him more take the floor on this one, for Far From Home, even though we're all really big fans of it. So.
Well, I mean, when I look at this movie, I guess it's a little unfair because I don't just see, a Spider-Man movie. I see a movie that pays homage to, the conclusion to Endgame with, spoiler alert, Iron Man dying,
Yeah.
and how this kind of had little. And again, I think I've said this before. With what really kind of does it for me with movies is kind of like the tipping of the hat, an
Yeah.
homage even to. I guess you can't really call this one particularly source material, but it's kind of like how John kept saying Tony Stark like bankrolled him and like stuff like that, and made things possible to happen at such a young age for him without him having to like strive for the means to adapt or get there himself. I think the concept of him being so young and put in such a and with the emotions he was feeling from the previous movie, um, being put in a situation where kind of someone came in and it reminded him of what he had lost, and it kind of played into the downfall, which again gives the character that learning moment where you kind of learn how to be a better hero, and you know life lesson. um it just, I don't know, I just, for me, with all of that said and in the mix, I mean, I felt like it was number one because
It doesn't get much
it was
better
a
than that.
movie.
Like
It
that
was
pretty
the
much
movie
checks
of
every
our
box.
time, well, it was a movie of like our time to a degree too, where like it had the CGI that we're used to, even though the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies did very well with the CGI. I just think that um, being
They're a
more
bit dated at this point.
yeah, being more accustomed to a more
To better quality graphics and whatnot.
modern movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again with everything else that I said that it had in it, I just felt like it should be number one because it's more relevant, which kind of helped me enjoy it more. Like if these movies came out side by side, it would probably be hard to compare. And I'm talking like graphics aside, even at that point, like
Yeah.
I'm story wise, but because of the movie it followed for me and how well it followed it and kind of brought spirit back to what was once lost. Because like he was really screwed up, kind of like the way Tony Stark was screwed up when the original Snap happened,
Yep.
and like he felt responsible for, you know, his death. Like, oh, he wouldn't have been there if it wasn't for me, kind of thing.
Yeah, and I did like how they did definitely play on that in this, to a pretty, noticeable extent in this movie with, especially like the scene like where like kind of the first Mysterio fight scene, if you want to call it that, where with the first illusion where they have like zombie Iron Man come out in Peter's like hallucination or Mysterio's illusion, and it's like, you know, and then he, says, that's really kind of how he feels about it when he's talking to Happy a little bit later, and it's like, that is how he feels about it, and that's great, like character progression and building and all that kind of stuff, and it is really a great story to watch. And like you said, I agree with pretty much everything you said, Mitch, honestly. Like about this movie is just, it is very well done, and it does, like that's the thing about the MCU, and that's why it's, the number one movie franchise in the world right now, is that like it just keeps building
The,
on
the
itself.
continuity,
The
the
continuity.
continuity in that movie, I
Yes.
mean, just for me, just takes the cake because it was almost like a seamless transition where it wasn't disrespectful in any way.
Mm.
It was just, I don't know,
Well,
the movie for
I
me.
like the fact that the MCU always does a good job of having like continuity and you being like, okay, this happens in the same universe, but it's also not like where it's like, the thing that they did with Rogue One. I know this is a big like tangent,
Tangent.
but like how they made it like fit too perfectly in with A New Hope. They
Yeah.
don't do that with Marvel. Like it's not like this movie like just started right where Endgame finished, right? It
Yeah.
didn't fit too
Right.
well, which because that's a problem. It just seems too contrived if it fits too well. You know what I mean? It has to seem like it's
Yes.
its own story, right?
Yes.
Which
Definitely.
is what they were able to do because,
Yep.
like we were saying, the way they do their continuity, like it doesn't, it like you said, it didn't, it's not like it followed directly after. There was a time people came back, school happened,
Yep.
you know what I mean, things like that, and
Yeah,
they're
you
going
can't
on a
fit.
trip, and
I agree. That's
they
actually
kept kind they kept kind of saying in the movie too, like, oh, like we need a break after everything that
that everything that happened, which actually is true
yeah.
because well, Endgame was probably the greatest movie of all time, but we won't go into that. Um, I think that you can't have like, and I said this before, you can't have every movie be like a battle for the fate of like the universe, like, and this movie did a great job, kind of like
It,
bringing things back to the
scaling it
ground.
down.
Yeah, toning it down, absolutely. So that was why another reason this movie gets, a lot of credit on my side. I really don't have too much bad to say about this movie. The only thing that there's only one thing that's sticking out to me right now that I didn't like, and believe it or not, even though I marked the hell out when this happened, the end credit scene in this movie was actually is actually a little bit of a problem for me looking at like the future of Spider-Man, because
Wrong, wrong.
let me finish.
I was not go. I would not have marked this movie as high if it wasn't for the end credit scene.
So okay, like bringing back J.K. Simmons was like that was the mark out moment, and I would do it again and again and a million times over every time I see it because that's just perfect. But the one problem I have with this is Mysterio revealing Peter's Spider-Man's identity as Peter to the world. Because the reason that I have an
Okay.
issue with this is because that is such a huge deviation once again from the source material, and who knows, maybe they'll play it right, and they probably will, and they'll make it work. I understand that, but there were only in the source material a very select few people who knew who Spider-Man was, and that was a big part of the story that was told around Spider-Man. Like, and another big part of Spider-Man's character was the fact that he gets hired as a photographer at the Bugle, and he takes these pictures of Spider-Man, and he that's a huge, huge, huge part of his character in classic Spider-Man. And I get that's not what they're going for with Tom Holland's Spider-Man mostly, but that's a big that I do enjoy, like that aspect of his character a lot, and the fact that we're not going to get that is kind of a negative for me. um, we're not going to get like that in any capacity, and actually that feeds into a bigger picture thing that I guess I'll bring up now too, which is like the whole like relationship and duality with like speaking of Peter working at the Bugle with J. Jonah Jameson, and like the duality of like J. Jonah as almost like a father figure to Peter, yet like a nemesis to Spider-Man, and it's a very interesting relationship. And I would argue, speaking of J. Jonah, I would argue that he's probably one of the most, if not the most important supporting characters of any superhero franchise
It's
because
just
of
because
his
he's
role
hilarious.
that he well not as it's not just because of that. Like, he's a great, very well written character, very hilarious, yes, but just the way that he interacts with Peter and Spider-Man and the role he plays in the development of both Peter and Spider-Man is just so important to the story of Spider-Man, and it almost feels like
Yeah,
we're
but they're
not going.
already past that part in the story. Like
I
that's
know, but
actually one of
like,
my problems with Tom Holland's Spider-Man, that they eliminated a lot of his backstory.
yeah, and that's like the one big negative for me. But I know I don't know if you have more you want to say about Far From Home, Johnny, because I know you didn't say too much about it. But yeah, that's really the only negative that I have to throw out there.
I like the fact that they kind of undid, like, well, not undid, but they kind of like made Spider-Man more of like having to work on his own after Mysterio was like, Mysterio took over all the tech, all the Stark tech. Like, he turned over the Stark tech to Mysterio, and then he found out that he's actually like a bad guy. And then it had to like Spider-Man had to work on his own, and he didn't have like the advantage of Tony Stark's bankroll for a brief moment. But that's honestly, it's like the problem, and it's similar to like the first movie where it's like the problem that they set up is they gave Spider-Man too many advantages, and then they had to take them away to make him like believable fucking underdog, which is also like in the first movie when he took away his suit, right? It was like the same thing, right?
Yeah,
They had to like take away something from Spider-Man to make him like the believable underdog, which honestly to me is like very antithetical to what Spider-Man's actually supposed to be. Like, he's supposed to be a character who just he doesn't have like, it's more like Spider-Man's a spoiled brat and he's an idiot and he loses his advantage because he's an idiot, or he like loses his advantage because he's acting like a spoiled brat, which is kind of like the opposite of what the Spider-Man character is supposed to be. He's supposed to be like a
kind
disadvantaged
of like the
poor kid
ultimate
who doesn't have
underdog.
any.
Yeah,
Yeah, he doesn't have any parents, and the only way he gets by is because he's smarter and
and because he
keener
sells
and more
Spider-Man photos to J. Jonah.
yeah, well, he's more resourceful, right? Like, he's like,
Yeah,
he doesn't know how he makes money by selling photos because it's like it's his he's Spider-Man, and so it's his skill, right? He's cashing in on his skill, right? It's like he's being resourceful.
yep,
But it's almost like in this iteration of Spider-Man doesn't have that part of the character, right?
yeah.
Like, it's like instead he's like a whiny brat. But I feel like this movie kind of like helped rectify that to some extent. Not as honestly, like, the damage was kind of done by the way that they wrote the character in the previous movie, but uh that was good. And like, at the end of the day, I love the fact that J.K. Simmons was in it. I thought everything was well done because it's MCU. The plot twists were good. They were interesting. They were like, I didn't know going into the movie that how Mysterio was going to be like a fucking bad guy, but I was like, oh, maybe he is from a different dimension or whatever.
Yeah, everybody.
And
I mean, I'm not gonna lie. They did kind of have me believing that for a split second too. I was like, like,
unfortunately, before I saw it, I saw like a video of like the fight of him fighting Mysterio, and I'm like, oh yeah, Mysterio's a bad guy, but I didn't know how they got there, right?
yeah, I gotcha. So
So yeah, but like I said, I think that like everything was executed well, but again, I just have in a way my biggest problem with this version of Spider-Man is just the way he's presented and how it's like the overall like emotional core of Spider-Man, the character, is lacking with the way this character has been created and presented.
yeah, I mean, when you put it that way, I do definitely to an extent agree. But I will also say I am enjoying the ride as well to a great extent with how they're playing the new Spider-Man. Again, I still kind of have. I guess I could bring them up again with the casting nitpicks, but I won't waste our time doing that again. But it's still kind of the same thing as what it was with the first one. But yeah, this is just a different Spider-Man, that we're seeing here, and I kind of agree with you actually, as I do prefer like the classically told Spider-Man story of the ultimate underdog and all that great stuff. Personally myself, but I am enjoying the Tom Holland Spider-Man as well, and what he brings to it. Like I said, I do
And here's
definitely.
the other thing.
Yeah.
Okay, Tom Holland, no offense, Jordan. I know you're not listening to this, but my wife's cousin Jordan, who's like this fucking like, he's a nice guy, but he's like a little kid. He's like 23, but he's like a little kid,
Okay.
That's who Tom Holland reminds me of.
Well, I think that is Tom Holland might be like 20, but yeah, close enough. So,
Yeah.
um,
No offense, Jordan. Again, he's great, but he's not Spider-Man. Like if actually I could see him being Spider-Man because he would be more of an underdog than Tom Holland is because Tom Holland is fucking bankrolled by, you know, daddy.
not anymore though, but kinda.
But he still has access to all his money and technology, and Happy Hogan is like his butler
Yeah,
or Happy
pretty
Humphrey
much.
or whatever the fuck his name is.
Yeah, that is his name actually. You got it right.
Happy Humphrey.
No, Happy Hogan.
Happy Hogan.
Happy Humphrey. What the fuck?
Happy Humphrey's like this really fat wrestler from like the 70s.
Well, well, I mean, I know we didn't really talk about it, but like the humor, especially like in these movies, I mean, it with the MCU, that's kind of a given, but like, there's a lot of good stuff there as well. So, um, but yeah, I mean, I think that covers that pretty well. So that means there's only one movie left that we haven't talked about, of course. So, coming in at number 1, and let me just say that this was a very difficult decision for me to make because I was kind of the tiebreaker here because I know Johnny voted for this movie that ended up being number 1. Mitch voted for the one we just talked about, and I was the tiebreaker. And I had a very difficult time making this decision, but after much deliberation and nitpicking, I decided that I was going
Number
to
1 is
side.
Spider-Man Enter the Spider-Verse.
Well, if I would have seen that, I might be on the list. But no, number 1
This
is...
is a ranking of live-action Spider-Man movies, so
Yeah,
it wouldn't be on the list.
Well, yeah, you got me there. So, yes, coming in at number 1 is Spider-Man 2 from 2004, the second of the Tobey Maguire Spider-Mans. And speaking of what I mentioned last time, well, when we talked about Far From Home, about the second movie being an upgraded version of the first movie.
Except for one instance.
Yeah, here we go with Spider-Man 2. So this movie, I think the best thing that I can say, or the encompassing feeling I have about this movie is this is probably, in my opinion, the purest form of translating the source material into a movie with such accuracy and such care for everything, for characters, for plot points, for, just everything, that it just does it so well. It does everything so well in this movie, and while simultaneously tweaking things like little, things, complaints that we may have had about the first Spider-Man movie with maybe the dialogue is a little too, hokey or unbelievable at some points, or stuff like that.
Yeah, they made it less hokey.
Yeah, or maybe inconsistencies, other little inconsistencies that didn't, quite, that weren't quite that good. This movie, ironed all of that out, in my opinion, to the point that this is just an absolutely incredible movie. You have just so many, like this movie, there's just so many iconic scenes in this movie just ripped right out of the source material and acclimated and fit to, into a movie screen setting, that there's just, you can't even mention them all. Just the character interaction. Again, you have, obviously Toby and, J. Jonah and, Emma, Mary Jane, and just everybody, aside from pretty much Willem Dafoe, even though he does make a cameo in Harry's Hallucination. But yeah, just absolutely, just everything about this movie. Like, I kind of hardly know where to begin, but like, the bank fight scene, Doc Ock versus Spider-Man, with kidnapping Aunt May, and the train fight scene, and the face, which is probably one of the negatives. I think one of the very few.
Dude, okay, I don't know why you would nitpick that, because like he's stopping a crane. He's not gonna look pretty when he's doing it. He's struggling. He's like putting his fucking life into this shit. He's like he's life or death for all these people on the train. Like, I don't know why you would expect him to look like fucking Hugh Jackman in like a fucking cologne commercial.
No. Well, I mean, to pay homage to that specific moment, that's why I have that on the thumbnail, but with Mitch's face over his face. But anyway, yeah, I mean, it did give us some pretty great memes. And then, of course, Pizza Time. Of course, could you pay me in advance?
Oh God, that's so good.
Oh,
wait, wasn't that in the third? Wasn't the Pay Me in Advance in the third movie?
Second one. It was the second one.
No, it was in the third movie.
I guarantee.
Because he was like,
no.
dude,
It's the
can you pay
second
me in
one.
advance? Because it was like his son was an astronaut. He's like, we're doing the ball for my son who's an astronaut,
Yeah, that
and
was
like
in the
that was where the
second one.
symbiote. No, the symbiote came from his son coming back from
Yes,
the
but that
astronaut.
this
From
was
the,
before that. Before the symbiote came back. He did it. This was the
all
second one because they were like
right, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
right before that happened. They were talking about Doc Ock rampaging in the city, and then he's like, "Oh, we don't have pictures. You're fired." And then he's like, "Oh, you got that planetarium party," and then he's like, "You're unfired."
Oh, right. No, I
So
thought this was like no, I thought that was in 3 when he was like.
no,
Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
you're definitely. I just watched these clips, so you're definitely
You're
wrong.
probably right. Whatever.
But yeah, but anyway, back to my point was there's just so many iconic scenes in this movie, just too many to name. So I mean, I'll turn it over to you because I know you pushed for this to be number one, Johnny, on the list as well, and I, like I said, did side with you. But yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So
incredible.
personally, I think that this movie was. Wait, am I still on? Did I just get disconnected? Or am I still here?
You're here.
Okay, cool. Sorry, I thought I got disconnected for a second.
No,
Um,
you're good.
honestly, personally, like I almost like the first Spider-Man better than this one, but the reason why this is number one is because the first Spider-Man sticks out in my mind more than this. But like, if I think about overall, like, what are the positives and what are the negatives? Like, this is definitely a better movie than the first Spider-Man. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, it's and part of that is because, like you said, even like the pay me in advance. I didn't even realize that was from this movie, but there's a lot of classic. Is this the one where he has like the heart medication or whatever, and it's like, or his wife is like keeps calling him? Is that this one or is that the third one?
That's the third one. Yeah.
Okay. Well, anyway, there's just so much classic J. Jonah Jameson. That's
Yeah,
like you get it all mixed
there's
up.
so
It's like
much. I mean,
he
I
is the
almost
one
don't blame
character.
you.
Okay, so
There's
he's
so
the
much.
character like between all 3 of these movies that was consistently written perfectly in all 3 movies. That's why. But
Absolutely.
but anyway, in this movie, so he's not really a plus to this movie because he's just equally as good in all of them. But
Not equally as good, equally as godly. But go ahead.
yes, sure, equally as awesome. But
We didn't even talk about when
like
we
I
were
said,
talking about Spider-Man 3. We were so hung up on Saturday
this
Night Fever that we didn't even mention how incredible Jay Jonah was. But anyway, go ahead.
anyway, the good thing about this movie had like a fall from grace storyline for Spider-Man. You
Yep.
know, like he gets the city turned against him, and then Peter like starts losing his powers. He can't quite get it up,
Yep.
and like him and MJ are having problems, and like everything is like on the rocks,
Harry
right? Like
finds out that
MJ.
he was the reason that his dad died, and so he hates him now. So,
Yeah, I
yep.
think the reason why this movie is good is because like I said, the best thing about Spider-Man is how he's an underdog who struggles with real life problems. And he never had more problems in any of the other Spider-Man movies than in this one.
You're right.
Like he couldn't pay his rent. That was that. This was the movie
Mr.
where
Ditkovich, yeah.
this is the movie where he said, "Give me rent." So I'm like, yeah, like he couldn't pay his rent, and it wasn't like as much of a joke as like the third one, but like he couldn't pay his rent. He couldn't deliver his pizza. He goes through, he gets so many like setbacks. He keeps coming back. He's Spider-Man.
Yes.
He's
And well,
got
and
the
he even
tenacity,
quit. He even quits being Spider-Man in this movie at one
yeah,
point.
he's
'Cause
so discouraged, but he has to take it back because he's like he has like the call to action because like Doc
with
Ock is
great
there and he
power
has to
comes great
comes great
responsibility.
response. Yeah, and it's good continuity, and it's just like I said, some of it's ham-fisted and a little cheesy, but whatever. It's a freaking comic book movie, and like all of them have that. So like it's a moot point. It's stupid. It's just I said it is a pinnacle of special effects for its time. It was. There's nothing really bad about this movie. Like all of the characters are good. The storylines and the progression of everything makes sense. I think I think the train scene is one of the best scenes in any Superman. I don't care about your thinking about Tobey Maguire's
The
ugly
face.
face. Tobey Maguire makes a bunch of ugly faces if you watch these movies. There's quite
Yeah,
a few
that
points
is
where,
true.
yeah, like his crying face,
Well, even
or
like
like,
and then even after, well, it's part of the train scene, I guess. Where, well, I mean, maybe I'll let Mitch talk about that because I know that's a big thing for him, the after train.
what,
But, um,
what,
well, go if you want to
what
take the
about it?
floor, Mitch, because I know you've been pretty quiet. About what happens after Toby stops the train, because I know that's one of your big favorite scenes in this movie.
Well, I don't like how like when he goes like he used so much power that it. Okay, so before I do this, I have to preface by saying Spider-Man is a lot stronger than what even the movies give him credit
Yeah.
for. Okay, so
Okay,
when
but Mitch, listen though, he is not always that powerful. It was kind of built up over time, and like it also kind of depends on who's writing him in the comics.
yeah, but this Spider-Man 2 is, when he was doing the freelance, and that's essentially one Spider-Man. In this, we're
This
not
is
talking
classic
Amazing
Spider-Man.
Spider-Man or Spectacular. Like, this was the Spider-Man that,
We all
everybody
know and
remembers
love.
from the original animated series and stuff like that.
Mhm.
My point is this, though. Like, I get that. Fine, maybe he exerted so much power because it is a train moving it. It's whatever, but he should have been able to stop that easier. But what even bothered me beyond that is just when the people grabbed him and then like kind of like body surfed him back and laid him down into an opening. He didn't have his mask on,
Yep.
and you hear people like, "Oh, he's just a kid," and this and that, and then like gets handed his mask, puts it on, and stands up, and essentially it's like, "Oh, your secret is safe with us." Meanwhile, you're in the middle of New York City. New York City is like people do things for money in New York.
Filled with
Wor-
assholes.
It wasn't as bad
yeah,
back in 2004.
But the other
worse
thing is,
worse
a
than
lot of stuff
worse
for
than
this movie.
going to the newspaper. And the other thing is too. You know how many flip phones and shit would have been out recording,
No, dude, in
and
2004, that flip phones with cameras weren't even very common.
but come on, dude. Again, New York on a train,
Sure.
like one person
But
has to have a phone.
but the train was so crowded that like probably only like maybe 50 people could even see it.
That's beside the
Oh,
point.
just 50 people.
That's beside the point. My point was actually the fact that like that moment, the point that I was trying to lead you to, which I guess you didn't get to, was the fact that that moment just kind of shows you like what who Spider-Man really is, kind of like he is just really that like
Yeah.
everyman hero, like that ultimate underdog, kind of thing. And the one thing that Spider-Man has always had on his side, well, maybe not always, but like Spider-Man's greatest asset has always been the people, essentially, like having the people on his side, even though they haven't always been on his side. But that's always been his greatest asset in my mind, anyway, is the people that he has on his side.
He's
That he
he's
is
like Hulk Hogan feeding on the third man.
yeah, pretty much. So, um,
Well, I mean, initially he wasn't exactly just accepted by the people.
no,
Yeah,
but I
that's
mean
also
like over time, like when they
that's also kind of part of it is how that was kind of like J. Jonah Jameson's kind of like vilifying him and everything. Like he's like it's where he proves to the people that he's
that he is the
he's
hero,
one of them.
that he's one of them and he is the hero. Yeah, absolutely. So, um, yeah, but yeah, so I'll let you go back, Mitch, to what you were, saying with the,
Well, no, I
your
mean, like I
overall
said,
feelings
it
also.
kind of, and I get that. Oh, he's like, the people's
The people's champ. He's the Rock,
fucking
basically.
hero, and yeah, But the thing, like I said, the thing that gets me is just.
You found a little bit of the scene to be unbelievable or unrealistic. I can understand that, but
Yeah,
it's kind of like
but
John
even
said. It's
but
like
like
it's a
but that
comic
but
movie
again,
based on
that
a
set
comic. It's
aside, what
gonna be a
also
little cheesy.
bothers me, what also bothers me is those like the what because in this movie Spider-Man goes to like a metamorphosis essentially because
Yeah.
in the comics when he has like issues with like losing his powers and stuff and then coming back,
Hmm.
they come back like tenfold. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I just seem like I just feel like he struggled a lot more than he had to.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I that is a fair point, but I will also say that I
But
think they
like
were just
again,
really
Spider-Man was
trying to.
always a character where like his powers kind of developed the more he was Spider-Man. It wasn't like he was at max power from the beginning. Plus, like
Yeah.
also the comic book, from what I read, that this was mostly based on was written in the 70s or the 60s even. It was like the late 60s, early 70s. So like Spider-Man really was not doing like all these crazy feats like lifting up trains over his head and like ripping people's arms off and shit back then.
Yeah, I mean, I
Well,
could.
I don't think he's ever ripped anyone's arm off.
Well,
Well,
no,
he
but
ripped off Doc Ock's mechanical arms at one point, didn't he?
well,
Well, that's
if you want to
different.
count that, but yeah, I get
Those
what
are
you're
That's
saying.
stronger
like
than
breaking a
regular arms.
toaster.
Well,
That's like
see, I
No,
get
they're
what you
breaking
guys
stronger
are
than
saying.
dude. Doc Ock's mechanical arms are way stronger than a normal human arm.
Well, probably they are,
right.
yes. But my point, I do get what you're
No, they
both coming from
definitely
for
are.
sure. But speaking of Doc Ock, I do have to say that I didn't want to forget to mention this. I
Oh
really
my
really
God! I was just thinking about like the scene with when you said that with Jonah Jameson, where he's like, "What do we call this guy?" And he's like, "Science squid. It's crap. Doctor Strange." And he's like, "Ah, it's good, but it's taken."
yes, and actually I'm really glad you brought that up because that's an even tangent to my tangent to mention, and I'm sure you guys probably know this already, but the fact that now Sammy Rami, the guy who directed the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man trilogy, has been recruited to direct the next Doctor Strange movie. So
Nice.
I think that that's fucking epic, right there. That like they mentioned to make a Doctor Strange reference, and then 16 years later they hire him to direct Doctor Strange. That's
Yeah.
awesome. But
And then
also,
and then like the first one he said was Doc Ock, and then he's like, "I got an idea. What about Doc Ock?
yeah,
Doctor Octopus, Doc Ock."
yeah,
He goes,
that's
"Bro,"
classic J. Jonah and
and then he
that's
goes,
really why I love this movie so much, and why at the end of the day I just couldn't, I couldn't put anything above this movie in my mind, is because this movie is so pure to like classic Spider-Man, which, as I did allude
without like
to,
overstepping its boundary and being too cheesy, like the first one did a bit,
exactly, yeah, and
and
I did
it
allude.
modernized it for
Right, and
2004.
what I said, like I said in when we talked about Far From Home a little bit ago, is that that is the version of Spider-Man that I enjoy the most. So that's why I couldn't logically say, even though Far From Home may very well be a better put together movie, but you'd have to weigh the time. Movie in 2004 versus 2019, 15 years is a lot of time. You know, so that it's hard to compare as far as like graphics and special effects, but at the same time, I will say that from like I think when you're looking for a tried and true Spider-Man movie, like Spider-Man 2 is a better Spider-Man movie, and I don't think there's a better Spider-Man movie than
So if you're like
Spider-Man 2.
you have to watch one Spider-Man movie to like this is Spider-Man, I would be like, well, I would say you have to watch the first two Spider-Man, Spider-Man 1 and Spider-Man 2,
Probably, yeah. But if
because
I had to pick one,
the thing is like. But that's the thing is I have to pick one. I guess you could watch Spider-Man because you don't really have to understand Spider-Man 1 to see Spider-Man 2.
sure. I mean, obviously, it would help a lot, but yeah, I get you. I get where you're coming from for sure. That
But
it's
I would not choose like any of the Tom Holland movies or either of the Andre Garfunkel movies if we had to choose between.
nobody would choose
there
the
are
Why
Andrew
do you keep
Garfield.
calling him Garfunkel? It's Andrew Garfield.
whatever his name is,
Yeah,
the tall emo guy,
yeah. So I think that's where it kind of
hipster. He's
rests for
hipster,
me. What?
hipster Spider-Man.
Sure. So yeah, I think that's where it kind of rests for me, is just you could maybe argue other Spider-Man movies were cinematically better potentially than this movie, but I don't think you could argue that there's a better Spider-Man movie, a more pure Spider-Man movie than this movie. And by the way, I didn't forget my tangent about Doc Ock. I wanted to say that obviously the whole thing with J. Jonah was genius, but like I also want to say I really like the way that they did Doc Ock in this movie too, like where he's at the end, he kind of like repents, I guess you would say, or all the fight scenes are great, obviously, but where he repents at the end, it's just they did his character very well too in this movie, and the guy played I don't know his name, but he played the role very well too. So yeah.
Now, where do we rank that Indian Spider-Man movie where Spider-Man like falls in love with Superman and they get married, or whatever?
I have
There's
no
like a
idea.
Bollywood Spider-Man movie with like terrible green screen effects.
I have
It's
no
all in like
idea.
Punjabi, and like Spider-Man like dances with Superman or something like that.
Yeah, I'm just gonna pretend you didn't say that. That's my
Yeah,
approach to that.
just look it up on YouTube.
Yeah, I'm not gonna do that. So, but yeah, I don't know
Yeah.
if you guys, Mitch, do you have anything else you want to add about Spider-Man 2?
No, I mean
But
that
Pretty well
pretty
covers it.
much well covers that. Yeah.
Fair enough. All right, so I think that does it for the list here. So, I think overall it's been an interesting journey with Spider-Man, and I think I speak for everybody when I say I'm definitely looking forward to see where they go with the Tom Holland Spider-Man. I think
I want Tobey Maguire to come back. I want the Spider-Verse to exist, and Tobey Maguire comes back,
there are
and he
talks
comes back
about that. I think that's
at
going
the
to happen
exact
at some
moment
point.
he's at the exact moment he's doing like the Saturday Night Fever dance.
He has the suit.
He
the
comes,
right when he walks out of the clothing store with the
dude.
new suit on. And well,
I dressed as Bully Maguire and sang Barbie Girl on the at karaoke on the cruise ship over winter.
oh, okay, sure.
I dressed as Bully Maguire and I did his moves.
Awesome.
That only kind of happened.
Kind of, sorta.
Dun, dun, dun,
I
dun,
think
dun,
we lost
dun,
Mitch.
dun, dun. Well, that's good. We
No.
don't need him for the end. So Bollywood Spider-Man. I just sent you the video. It's number one in my. It's number one in our hearts.
No, it's not. I like I said, I'm gonna pretend that didn't exist, but um,
Watch what I just sent you.
yeah, not gonna do it. Anyway, so I think that's going to be it. Oh yes, Mitch is back for the sign off, so that's good. So
What the hell just happened?
I don't know, but you're back for the sign off. So, yeah, like I said, I think we're all curious. I think they're really playing the long game with the Tom Holland Spider-Man, so I'm really interested to see where that goes. But overall, that is our power rankings to date. So that's it. Thanks for watching again, everybody. Hope you all enjoyed. Please hit that like button, leave a comment, subscribe, share the video, all that kind of stuff if you did enjoy, and stay tuned for more new videos in the future. I want to thank Jonny Reps and Mitchelonius, the not-so-expert panel of movie critics, for joining me once again to do another Power Rankings. So thank you, guys.
No problem.
Yes.
Later.
So. Hey, dig on this.
Yes! I completely forgot.
What?
I completely forgot, dig on this and all that good stuff.
Is that like the Smacks guy?
No, that's
put some dirt in your eye.
I was gonna say, I was gonna say dig on this beforehand. At some point.
Who's the dig on this?
That's when he's in the club and like before he starts going crazy in the third one with like dancing and Gwen Stacy and everything. He's like, now dig on this.
Let me put some jizz in your ear.
Oh my god. I can't believe that's what you actually thought he said. for 13 years, that's what you thought it was.
I wasn't putting anything past that movie, man.
Whatever.
I was like, it seems plausible.
Seems plausible. All right. Well, I guess that's it. We will just leave you with this parting thought right here.
Yeah, we're done.
Dig on this.
Now dig on this. So this is it.
This was for you, folks.
And we'll see you next time. Next time.